As Washington continues to digest the Mueller report, some are pointing out the differences between what the special counsel wrote and what the Attorney General said when the report was released.
But again, the special counsel's report did not find any evidence that members of the Trump campaign or anyone associated with the campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in these hacking operations. In other words, there was no evidence of the Trump campaign collusion with the Russian government's hacking.
The report states that Mueller's team applied the framework of conspiracy law, not the concept of collusion, which isn't an actual legal term.
The White House fully cooperated with the special counsel's investigation, providing unfettered access to campaign and White House documents, directing senior aides to testify freely, and asserting no privilege claims. And at the same time, the president took no act that in fact deprived the special counsel of the documents and witnesses necessary to complete his investigation.
We also sought a voluntary interview with the president. After more than a year of discussion, the president declined to be interviewed.
The Deputy Attorney General and I concluded that the evidence developed by the special counsel is not sufficient to establish that the president committed an obstruction of justice offense.
The issue of obstruction, the report noted, if we had confidence after a thorough investigation of the facts that the president did not commit obstruction of justice, we would so state. However, we are unable to reach that judgment.
All right, we can now bring in Politico's Darren Samuelsohn. His recent piece is titled Barr v. Mueller, Friends Pitted Against Each Other. And as you see there, he joins us from, I think you're in Arlington today. Is that right, Darren?
That is correct. That's right. I'm in Arlington, Virginia.
And we're looking at your Politico piece here where you highlight the close relationship between Robert Mueller and Attorney General Barr. I'm wondering then for you, as someone who has looked into this, how, I don't know, surprised you were last week as you watched the press conference before the Mueller report and seeing the differences in tone and message between the two.
Yeah, it was surprising for people who know William Barr and know Robert Mueller. The two men go way back to the George H.W. Bush administration. Their wives are close friends that attend Bible study together. They've been to family weddings together. So personally, they have a pretty sharp connection that William Barr actually drew out during his Senate confirmation hearing, which in some respects satisfied some of the senators who were a little bit concerned that when he came in, he would, clamp down and maybe shut down the Mueller probe. But what we saw last Thursday was absolutely a case study and two divergent opinions on some of the core fundamental issues at the center of Donald Trump's presidency. And, we're talking primarily about the rhetoric that William Barr used, which really, co-opted some of the language that Donald Trump has used about no collusion. If you look at the Mueller report itself, the word collusion is only there to explain the legal term is really not a legal term. It's more about conspiracy. You had this sharp sort of legal difference there on the rhetoric that Barr used compared to Mueller. You also saw just in the way that...
Well, Darren, can you drill down on that just a bit more? Because it seems to be the headline out of effectively everything that the Attorney General has been saying for the past few weeks, right? We have found no collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. But for the special counsel, there's only really a passing reference to that note. So what does it mean that the Attorney General felt the need to really drill down this message repeatedly when that was not the central component of Mueller's report?
Yeah, you're asking a fascinating million-dollar question that everyone on Capitol Hill will be pushing Mr. Barr himself to explain when he goes and testifies. Clearly when he came into this job as the Attorney General, it's not something that he says that he sought out, but he basically conceded that he would take the position, a position that really nobody wanted. He is seen as maybe more of an executive, a fan of executive power, of presidential power. This is something, that he saw and argued back in the George H.W. Bush years as well. Mm-hmm. And I think in President Trump, they saw someone in William Barr who could, effectively push that message forward. And so by making the sort of no collusion argument the way he did, which obviously is something that Donald Trump, wanted to hear, he was walking the same line that the president wanted. And it is, again, very different than Mr. Mueller, whose job was a very different one, which was to investigate investigate, all the aspects of the presidential election. But, from a legal standpoint, it was jarring for a lot of people watching to have Mr. Barr repeatedly make that no collusion comment, when clearly the investigation wasn't, directly about the words collusion, but conspiracy to commit a variety of crimes, campaign finance crimes, hacking crimes, obstruction crimes, other things like that we did see in a lot of the charges that were brought by Mueller.
And we've also heard the Attorney General repeat the White House line when it comes to cooperation, Barr saying the White House fully cooperated. But the special counsel notes that the president did not even sit down for an interview, right? His answers were written. What does that tell us?
I think that's another example where, Mr. Barr is, I wouldn't say parroting a line that the White House wanted, but he certainly, gave a line that you do expect to hear from the Trump legal team, from the Trump White House, when in fact, as you just pointed out, and as Mueller makes it clear, they tried to get the president to sit for an actual interview for full cooperation for more than a year, and it never went that next step, which was a big step that Mueller obviously considered having to go and subpoena Donald Trump to sit down and answer questions, which is something that they decided not to do because that could elongate the investigation much further than it already took. So, that was one more example. Obviously, the White House was cooperative on a lot of levels, and they did submit to a myriad number of staffers who sat down for interviews. They handed over lots and lots of documents that were then cited right back at them in the course of the investigation.
Now, it sounds like what you're saying is the Attorney General, a fan of executive privilege. Maybe for him, all of this is just about protecting the presidency. But we did also hear Barr say there wasn't sufficient evidence to establish that President Trump obstructed justice. But if we look at that key line in the Mueller report, the special counsel wrote in part, quote, "If we had confidence after a thorough investigation of the facts, the president clearly did not commit obstruction of justice, we would so state." Just walk us through how significant that line is and help explain if you feel that should be the biggest line of concern for the president right now.
I think it is one of the bigger lines of concern for the president. Unclear what the penalty would be, though, if Congress were to take exactly what Mueller put forward in the report last Thursday and wrote up 10 articles of impeachment on those 10 grounds that Mueller played out. The votes would likely be pretty party line right now in the House. And that does not translate to Senate conviction. That translates to a party line vote in the Senate, and Donald Trump would remain president for the next 2 years. And that's the big political question. So, while Mueller did lay out, some evidence of obstruction of justice, you obviously are hearing from House Democrats that they agree that some of those were, and they're going to continue to investigate and bring, witnesses who were part of that report straight into the Capitol to testify. We just saw a subpoena issued in the last couple of minutes for former White House counsel Don McGahn. That's one of many, witnesses that I think they're going to try and get to come talk and answer questions and, give them the evidence that they need. Now, whether, they want to take this the full next step and actually push for, articles of impeachment through the House Judiciary Committee, make Donald Trump, the third president of the United States ever to be impeached by a House. But, the history is that there's never been a Senate conviction. It's come close in Andrew Johnson's case, but not in Bill Clinton's case. And I think that's likely where we'd be headed in the Senate. So that's the huge political question Democrats are facing, is if they did want to do this, if they did feel like they wanted to, assert their checks and balances that the Constitution requires for them, they can do it. But then the political question comes back. Do they embolden Donald Trump, make him a stronger president on the other side of an impeachment trial, and potentially, give him a second term if people feel, the voters feel like Donald Trump is actually the victim here? And that's the political question they're dealing with.
And just in our last few seconds before we go, as far as you know, the Mueller and Barr families are still friends, right? They still chatting?
As far as I know, they're still friends. That's something that, Mr. Mueller, as you saw from the TV footage earlier this weekend, he's still not talking in any way, shape, or form. We'll see him when he testifies on the Hill. I bet Mr. Barr will be asked about, probably not their personal relationship, but, these people in the Justice Department, these senior leaders, they span administrations from decades to decades. So I'm going to have a hard time believing that this is really going to cause a serious problem between those two, long-established family members who are part of, the Justice Department circle. That's a pretty small circle here in Washington.
Yeah, but a great article that you've written. I mean, it's just quite fascinating to know these guys are friends. Barr is scheduled to appear on Capitol Hill in the beginning of May, and Robert Mueller has been requested to testify May 23rd. Darren Samuelsohn, thank you so much for your time today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.